Marcus got his first serious raise, $15,000 extra annually, and did the numbers in his head before he even pulled out of the parking lot. $1,250 more landing in his account every single month. He actually said it out loud driving home, the way you repeat something that doesn't quite feel real yet. The financial pressure that had been sitting on his chest for years was finally going to lift. No more mental math every time a purchase put his balance in danger. No more watching the savings account go nowhere. He was finally going to get ahead. 12 months later, Marcus found himself staring at his banking app on a slow Sunday evening. The kind of Sunday that feels hollow when the week ahead hasn't arrived yet, and your thoughts drift toward everything you've been avoiding. And he looked at the savings balance. It was $2,300 lower than it had been the day before the raise ever hit his account. Not flat, not stagnant, lower. $15,000 new had flowed through his life over 12 months and left behind absolutely nothing. Actually, less than nothing. No blowout purchases, no impulsive big-ticket splurges, no moment he could point to and say, "There, that's where it went." Just life. Ordinary, unremarkable, completely normal life. And that right there is what makes this so deeply unsettling. Because Marcus is not an edge case. This is not a cautionary tale about someone who made unusual mistakes. This is one of the most consistent and predictable money patterns playing out across every income bracket in modern life. Someone earning $40,000 who moves to $50,000, and someone doubling their salary and still watching their financial progress flatline. There is a name for what swallowed Marcus's raise whole. It's called lifestyle creep. It doesn't warn you it's coming. It doesn't require your agreement. It just silently expands what you consider ordinary, one perfectly sensible-looking choice at a time, until the cost of your daily life has risen to meet every dollar coming in, sometimes past it. The mechanics aren't difficult to follow. More income tends to pull more spending along with it. The issue isn't spending more when you earn more. That's a natural human response, and within reason, there's nothing wrong with it. The real trap is buried in one word: automatically. Lifestyle inflation is what happens when your expenses climb on their own, and not because you sat down and chose to spend differently, but because more money quietly shifted your internal baseline for what counts as normal. What once felt like an indulgence starts feeling like a standard. What once felt excessive starts feeling like something you've clearly earned by now. And gradually, without a single alarming moment, the distance between your income and your outgoing expenses snaps back to where it started. More money in? Yes. But no greater sense of financial breathing room. A study that traveled widely through personal finance coverage found that 58% of Americans who landed a meaningful raise had grown their monthly spending to match it within 90 days. Not over the course of a year, 90 days. The money arrives and the lifestyle reshapes itself around that new number almost immediately. And this isn't just a math failure, it's a psychological one. Because at no point during this process does anything feel out of control. Every single choice is easy to justify. A step up in dinner options, a marginally better apartment, a subscription service that buys back a little time. Each decision stands on its own just fine. It's only when you zoom out far enough to see all of them together that the pattern becomes visible. Richard Thaler, the behavioral economist whose work on human decision-making earned him the Nobel Prize, identified a concept he called mental accounting, the tendency people have to sort money into psychological buckets in ways that bear little relationship to actual rational thinking. A raise doesn't land in the brain labeled opportunity to build savings. It lands as a new bucket entirely. Want an unofficial green light. And that quiet, unannounced green light is precisely where the money disappears. So let's follow the trail. Let's track exactly where Marcus's $15,000 actually went. Not in generalities, but in 9 specific habits that grew slowly in the background of an otherwise unremarkable year. And for every single one, we're looking at the real numbers, because the numbers don't have feelings. They don't make excuses. They just tell the truth. The first category, where money quietly bleeds out after a raise, is also the most social, the most genuinely enjoyable, and for both of those reasons, the hardest to catch: food. Before the raise landed, Marcus wasn't precious about where he ate. A decent spot near work, something fast and filling, but a meal in the $12 range. That was completely acceptable. Then the raise came through, and something in his sense of what was fitting gradually recalibrated, not as a conscious shift, more like a slow drift in what felt appropriate. A proper sit-down dinner with a friend on a Tuesday stopped seeming like a treat and started seeming like a reasonable weeknight. $35, $40, $45 for 2 people at dinner stopped reading as a splurge and started reading as just what dinner costs. Here's the honest part, though. The food itself wasn't transformatively better. The setting had a bit more polish, sure, but his hunger walking in and his satisfaction walking out were the same. The only number that genuinely changed was on the bill. Psychologists have a term for the mechanism behind this: hedonic adaptation. It's the documented human pattern of adjusting to improved conditions so quickly and completely that those conditions stop feeling improved at all. They just become the floor. Daniel Kahneman's research into well-being and how people evaluate their own choices found that people reliably overestimate how much lasting pleasure an upgrade will give them, and reliably underestimate how rapidly that pleasure collapses into expectation. The better restaurant loses its glow. It simply becomes where you eat. Meanwhile, the math runs quietly in the background. 4 meals out per week, completely typical for someone in their early 30s with a functioning social life, with the per-meal average climbing from $12 to $35, means an extra $23 each time, 4 times a week across 52 weeks. Now that's almost $4,800 across 1 year, spent on meals he can barely recall, each one feeling in the moment like the most reasonable thing in the world. The second habit is broader, harder to see, and somehow the one that's become most socially normalized: housing. Something happens to the apartment you've been living in comfortably once a raise clears your bank account. It doesn't suddenly look terrible. It just starts to look like it belongs to a slightly earlier version of you. The bathroom that was perfectly fine last year now carries a vague suggestion that something better is within reach. That's not ego. That's a completely recognizable human reaction to expanded options. And the rental market exists in a state of permanent readiness to answer that feeling. The next tier up, a little more space. A marginally better block. A small gym on the ground floor almost always runs just $200 or so more per month, which sounds like nothing measured against a $15,000 raise. But $200 a month over 12 months is $2,400 a year. And unlike food, housing locks in. You sign the lease and it becomes your new normal. You adjust to it. And when the next raise arrives, the same restlessness surfaces around a slightly higher baseline. Alain de Botton wrote in Status Anxiety about the silent force of upward comparison in how we experience what we have. We don't benchmark ourselves against people in radically different circumstances. We benchmark against those just one tier above us, against the version of life that seems like the obvious next step. But housing is the clearest and most expensive arena where that instinct plays out. A raise doesn't settle the gap between where you are and where you want to be. It simply moves that gap to a higher elevation. The discomfort remains. The reference point just shifts upward. The third habit comes wrapped in its own ready-made logic. The car. Few objects in daily life carry as much unspoken status weight as the vehicle parked in your spot, and almost no financial decision feels more personally validated by an income increase. The car Marcus already owned ran perfectly well. It started every morning. It got him everywhere he needed to go. But after the raise, it started to feel like a gap between his current reality and the version of himself he was growing into. Maybe it was the year on the model. Maybe it was what surrounded it in the work parking garage. Maybe it was simply the feeling that the effort had been put in and something better was now within reach. And so the lease conversation began, or the financed upgrade. And this is where things get quietly brutal in the numbers. The gap between what someone was spending on a paid-off or nearly paid-off car and what a new lease or loan requires often runs between $300 and $500 monthly, every month, without interruption. That can represent up to 60% of the entire additional monthly income from the raise, gone before anything else gets a chance at it. On top of that, the vehicle brings along costs that don't announce themselves at the dealership. Bigger insurance premiums, higher registration costs, and potentially steeper maintenance on a more sophisticated machine. James Clear makes a point in Atomic Habits that applies directly here. The upgrade decision doesn't feel like a repeating commitment. It registers as a single choice, made one afternoon, signed once. But the financial impact knocks on your door a dozen times a year for the full term of the contract. The weight of making the decision fades almost immediately. The charge itself does not. The fourth habit is one of the quietest of them all, almost never named in any conversation about lifestyle inflation. Because it doesn't happen in one moment. It creeps in item by item in a place where spending money already feels responsible. The grocery store migration. There's a category of food retailer that has drifted into cultural shorthand for a certain kind of adult identity. Wide, unhurried aisles, produce that looks like it was photographed for a magazine, soft lighting, and prices that run anywhere from 40 to 60% above the standard alternative. And when income rises, the drift toward these stores tends to happen without a formal decision. The premium store is conveniently near the better apartment. The products align with a growing sense of how you want to eat and what you want to stand behind. The entire experience of doing the weekly shop there is noticeably more pleasant. And every individual item seems like a small, completely rational upgrade. What never gets computed is the total. Someone who makes this shift fully, from a standard supermarket to a premium grocer, typically absorbs somewhere between $200 and $400 extra in monthly food spending for nutritional outcomes that are nearly identical. The organic and conventional versions of the same vegetable carry almost identical nutritional content. The premium brand pasta and the store label version are indistinguishable to nearly everyone eating them without the packaging in view. Behavioral economics offers a framework for why this still feels worth it. Price-quality signaling. Human brains are wired to read a higher price as evidence of higher quality, regardless of whether measurable quality differences exist. A 2019 study published in the Journal of Marketing Research confirmed that people consistently experience the same product as better tasting and more satisfying simply when they believed it had cost more. Marcus's groceries weren't genuinely superior, they registered as superior. And that registration cost him somewhere between $2,400 and $4,800 over the course of a year. The fifth habit is the one that, if most people are being straight with themselves, they already have a quiet suspicion about and keep feeding anyway. Subscriptions. The entire business model of subscription services was constructed with real psychological precision to register as essentially free. $12 a month, $15, $8.99. Each one examined on its own is effortlessly justifiable. The cost of a single coffee buys unlimited streaming. A little less than a fast food lunch covers a full fitness app. Practically nothing secures cloud storage for everything you own. And so they pile up, not in one undisciplined rush, but through a long series of completely reasonable individual signups. Streaming services expand from 1 to 2 to a family plan for a third, plus the sports tier, music, podcasts, meditation, a productivity suite, cloud backup, a premium newsletter or 2, recipes, ebooks, 15 services averaging $12 each runs to $180 a month, $2,160 a year, mostly running in the background, opened occasionally, and almost never reviewed in total. A 2022 survey by C+R Research found that consumers underestimate what they spend on subscriptions by more than $100 monthly on average. Not out of dishonesty, because the human brain genuinely cannot add together a dozen small recurring charges scattered across different billing cycles, different platforms, and multiple payment methods. The money moves while your attention is pointed somewhere else. And after a raise, the invisible internal threshold for what feels worth keeping rises right along with the income, making every subscription feel even more obviously worth holding onto than before. The sixth habit is the hardest one to argue against because it arrives dressed as something genuinely positive. The "I've earned this" purchase. And to be fair, you probably have earned it. That's not the problem. No, the problem arrives when deserving something shifts from being an occasional, considered act to being a permanent background justification for spending. A raise does something to your psychological relationship with money that's genuinely hard to perceive while it's happening. It creates what behavioral economists sometimes call an entitlement effect. The internal logic runs quietly and persistently. I put in the work. I bring home more than I used to. I have access to things I couldn't touch before. So this thing I want right now, it's fine. The thing might be a jacket, a piece of tech, a spontaneous weekend away, or a string of smaller buys that don't individually register as significant, but collectively form a new pattern of reward-based spending built into the rhythm of the week. A Morgan Housel makes a point in The Psychology of Money that cuts straight to the core of this habit. We evaluate other people by their actions and ourselves by our reasons. Someone else spending freely reads as irresponsible. When we're the ones doing it, there is always a context, a reason, a set of circumstances that makes it land differently. The danger isn't any single item bought in a moment of reward. The danger is the mental frame that makes every purchase feel pre-approved and therefore never genuinely evaluated. Across a full year of slightly more frequent, slightly more expensive treat-based spending, the cumulative damage often sits somewhere between $1,500 and $3,000. Invisible, because it arrived one small deserved moment at a time. The seventh habit has acquired respectable-sounding language in financial circles. Convenience spending. But with the framing stripped away, it simply means paying extra for the same outcome because it no longer hurts to do so. Before the raise, Marcus cooked on weeknights. Not out of any deep love for cooking, because spending $22 on a delivery order for a meal he could make for $6 felt like a clear and obvious waste when money was genuinely limited. After the raise, that same $22 total stopped generating any resistance. It reframed as a sensible trade, money exchanged for recovered time and energy. And in specific situations, that trade genuinely holds up. The problem is that it rarely stays confined to specific situations. It spreads. The delivery order that was occasional becomes routine. The rideshare that was a treat becomes the standard where public transit used to be perfectly adequate. The pre-sliced fruit in the plastic container, priced at 3 times what the whole version costs, drops into the cart without a second thought. The airport lounge membership that effectively pays for itself with enough travel. The premium wash instead of the standard. The dry cleaning for things a home machine handles just fine. Not one of these is absurd on its own. Every single one makes sense in context. But stacked together across a month, convenience spending for someone whose income has risen meaningfully often lands at an extra $250 to $400 above what it used to be. $3,000 to nearly $5,000 annually spent on the marginal reduction of minor personal effort. Richard Thaler's research on what he called the pain of paying is worth noting here. Physical cash creates measurably stronger psychological resistance to spending than a card tap or an app. The frictionless payment infrastructure powering modern convenience spending is not neutral technology. It was designed specifically to reduce the psychological friction of spending, which reliably increases the amount spent without proportionally increasing the amount of thought invested in each decision. The 8th habit unfolds in the context of relationships, which makes it especially difficult to name out loud, let alone address. Gift-giving inflation. There is a social pressure most people feel but rarely put into words. As income rises, there's a quiet internal expectation for generosity to scale with it. Some of this is self-generated. And the $50 birthday gift that felt fully adequate a couple of years back now feels a little thin for someone who genuinely matters to you, given what you're making now. Some of it comes from the outside. As income climbs, so do social circles and the unspoken standards around gifts. Shared experiences and celebrations tend to sit higher within more financially comfortable peer groups. The holidays expand in scope. Wedding gifts grow more substantial. Birthday dinners evolve from a casual split toward a moment where the expectation is that you'll quietly absorb the check. None of this reflects bad intent or manipulation. It's simply the invisible social math of upward income movement. But the actual costs stack up faster than anyone anticipates. Someone with an active personal life, solid friendships, family celebrations, a few weddings or significant milestone events each year, who bumps their average spending per occasion upward by even $30 to $50, will absorb $800 to $1,200 extra dollars annually on other people's happiness. Which sounds almost admirable until you recognize it as a largely reflexive response to income, rather than a deliberate expression of what generosity means to you. The 9th habit feels the most like reward, the most like genuinely living your life, and the most like something you clearly worked hard enough to have, which is precisely what makes it the most financially dangerous of the 9. Vacation inflation. Before the raise, Marcus planned trips with an eye on what made sense financially. Road trips, shared Airbnbs, splitting costs down the middle with friends. And those trips delivered. Real fun. The kind built from novelty and good company and being somewhere different, not from the quality of the pillow. After the raise, something changed in how those options felt during the planning phase. The road trip started carrying a faint connotation of settling. The Airbnb began to feel like it sat just below what now seemed appropriate. The flight started to feel like the obvious call where driving had always been fine before. Then the hotel entered the picture. Then the logic of, we may as well take the better room since we're here. Then the restaurant on vacation that runs nicer than anything he'd choose at home, because vacation justifies it. Every single individual step upward makes complete sense. Combined, they can double the cost of a trip almost without effort. A vacation that would have run $1,200 2 years ago now costs closer to $2,500. 2 trips at that level means an extra $2,600 a year spent on experiences that, according to research on how people actually experience and recall happiness, deliver roughly equivalent levels of remembered satisfaction regardless of what they cost. Psychologist Elizabeth Dunn, whose research focuses specifically on how money and spending connect to happiness, found that past a modest baseline of comfort, increased spending on experiences does not generate proportionally more happiness. The budget version and the upgraded version tend to be remembered with similar warmth, because what lodges in memory is the company you kept, the moments that caught you off guard, right? The small details that couldn't have been planned, not the nightly rate. Now let's do what Marcus didn't do until the year was already over. Let's put all of it together. Dining out, just under $4,800. The housing step-up, $2,400. The car payment gap, $3,600. Groceries, $3,600. Subscriptions, $2,160. Convenience spending, $3,600. The earned it purchases, $2,500. Gift creep, $1,000. The vacation upgrade, $2,600. Total, roughly $24,000. Against a $15,000 raise, which is exactly the mechanism by which someone ends up with less saved after a raise than before they got one. Because lifestyle inflation doesn't simply absorb the new income, it has a reliable tendency to outrun it, particularly when a portion of those upgrades involve fixed recurring obligations like rent and loan payments that push total monthly expenses above what even a real, meaningful raise can fully absorb. Here's what matters most about all of it. Not a single one of those decisions required irresponsibility. That's what makes this pattern so difficult to see and so critical to understand. Marcus didn't make reckless choices. He didn't develop a damaging habit. He didn't lose money. He just lived the way most people live, with a slightly wider definition of what ordinary looks like. And that silently widened ordinary is the entire mechanism. It's not what you spend. It's what you stop registering that you're spending. Oh, so what actually changes it? Not through restriction and punishment, not through cutting everything back to nothing, but through being intentional rather than automatic. This week, one concrete action. Open every subscription you are currently paying for. Pull your bank statement or use an app that consolidates recurring charges. Find every single repeating payment and ask yourself one straightforward question about each one. Have I actually used this within the last 30 days? Not could you use it. Not might you use it eventually. Actually used it. In the past 30 days. Everything that answers no gets canceled. This is not a dramatic move. It takes 45 minutes at most. And for anyone doing this with genuine honesty, it tends to recover between $40 and $120 a month starting immediately. This month, put in place what some financial planners refer to as the raise rule. The principle is simple. Whenever income goes up, raise, bonus, side income, any new money arriving, 50% of the increase moves directly into savings before it ever touches your normal spending life. Not after you've spent a month living on the higher amount and set aside whatever remains. Before. The same day the raise takes effect, the automatic transfer is already set. The reason this outperforms pure willpower comes directly from behavioral economist Shlomo Benartzi's research into savings behavior. People are dramatically more ready to commit to saving income they haven't received yet than to cut back on money they're already spending. The raise is still fresh. It hasn't been absorbed into your sense of normal yet. That window is narrow. The automatic transfer has to happen inside it because 30 days later it will feel indistinguishable from money you've always had and always needed. This quarter, run one honest audit. Pull your bank and card statements from exactly 12 months ago and compare them category by category to where things stand today. Not to shame yourself, not to punish anything, just to look. Groceries, dining, transportation, entertainment, subscriptions, housing. See where the gradual inflation happened. Because you can't manage what you haven't made visible. And most lifestyle creep remains invisible for exactly as long as you stay out of the categories where you assumed there was nothing to track. And none of this is an argument against ever upgrading anything. It's not a case for eating at the same places forever, or staying in the first apartment you could afford until you retire. Spending more on things that produce genuine, lasting improvement in your life and reflect what you actually care about is completely reasonable. The question is not whether money was spent. The question is whether you decided to spend it or whether it spent itself. That distinction, spending with awareness versus spending on autopilot, is the complete difference between building real financial progress on an ordinary income and standing at the end of the year genuinely puzzled about where the raise went. Marcus eventually worked it out. Not in year one. Year one, he was mostly confused, a little embarrassed, and doing his best not to look at the banking app any more than he had to. But in year two, and after he traced every number and saw exactly where the pattern had taken hold, something actually changed. He didn't go austere. He didn't eliminate anything wholesale. He just put one rule in place. When his next raise came through, smaller this time, around $8,000, he moved $4,000 directly into savings before the first paycheck under the new amount ever landed in checking. He kept the apartment. He held on to most of the subscriptions. He kept going to the nicer dinner spots occasionally. But he did those things as choices, not as defaults. 2 years after that Sunday evening when he first understood what had actually happened, he had $18,000 saved. And more valuable than the number itself was something harder to quantify. He had a relationship with money that wasn't built on anxiety. And he knew where it was going because he had been the one to decide where it was going. The spending he kept felt genuinely satisfying in a way that automatic upgrades never had, because it was his, not just what the situation assembled around him. The goal was never to live as though nothing had changed. The goal is to live with full awareness of what has changed, and to spend in a way that reflects actual choices rather than invisible defaults. The money you bring in is a resource. Like any resource, it can be directed with purpose, or it can simply drain away. Lifestyle creep is what fills the space where a decision should have been. And the most powerful financial move available to most people earning an ordinary income isn't a sophisticated investment approach or an extreme savings protocol. It's simply the discipline of noticing, and of stopping once a year or once a quarter to ask, is the life I'm currently paying for the life I would actually build if I sat down and thought it through? Or is it the life that quietly constructed itself while I was occupied with everything else? Because there is a version of your financial life that looks almost exactly like the one you have right now. Same income, comparable quality of life. And it builds real wealth slowly and steadily, year after year, without requiring sacrifice or going without. The only thing separating that version from the one Marcus lived through in year one is paying attention. And paying attention, unlike a raise, doesn't cost a single thing. If something in here landed, if there was a moment where you thought to yourself, quietly, that's exactly where I am, it might be worth passing this along to someone who'd recognize it too. And if you've been sitting with the feeling that your savings don't seem to grow even when your income does, The next video goes deeper into the psychology behind why most people's financial defaults are working against them, and exactly what it takes to reset them. See you there.